Dufferin-Caledon. The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Post Office. I'm your host, Mayor Lisa Post. I'm really excited you've joined me today because I have a very special guest. It's one of my council colleagues, Councillor Joe Andrews. Thank you for joining me here tonight.
Well, it is really an absolute pleasure, Lisa, to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation.
We've gotten to work together for a number of years now.
We have.
And before we get into kind of the council talk, I want to introduce you to the community. There's been a lot of change in the community over the years, particularly through COVID, and I think there are some people out there that don't necessarily know all of our councillors. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, this has been an interesting time, not only going through COVID and, the opportunity to represent people in our community as a councillor, but been heavily involved and really an absolute honor to be heavily involved in our community. Actually, involved in our community since 1988. And how that journey began is through my previous career, which was in radio and television and broadcasting. And so in 1988, I had the opportunity with the former DC 103.5 to host a Saturday morning radio show.
I remember that radio station.
And consult for the radio station. My career actually was before that period of time. I was very fortunate to start my career in the late 70s in broadcasting. Started with a number of opportunities that elevated my career, not only as an on-air performer, but also in management, and then moved to an elevated role with the Chum Group, and then also with the Power Broadcasting Group as Vice President of Programming. So it was an interesting opportunity for me to really give back in a different way. I have to say I was fortunate, blessed in that career, but it also reached a plateau. And as much as that plateau provided me with opportunities to, not only guide people in broadcasting, meeting, you name the celebrity, I had the opportunity of either meeting them or interviewing them, and or even going to their concerts, which is for another time. But I wanted to kind of give back in a different way. So an opportunity came along for me to actually move into the education world, and this is really where I took the leadership that I had within the broadcasting sector, and kind of translated that into the classroom. So I started off as a professor in the broadcasting program at Humber College.
Oh, at Humber, okay.
And so thus it was an opportunity for me to give back and then, of course, take some of the leadership skills that I had from my broadcasting career and dealing with people, and then subsequently, of course, parlay that into administrative roles in Humber. So kind of moving along through that route, an opportunity came along in 2004, 2005 to kind of translate some of that leadership into a new project that Humber was launching at the time here in Orangeville, which was the development of the Humber Orangeville campus. So very much involved with the infancy of that particular development. So in 2005 was appointed as the Director for Community Relations, and then moved into the Director of Academic Operations for Humber in 2006. The objective, as if anyone is not familiar with the story of Humber Orangeville, was to build a full-service regional campus on lands that, in fact, it was a partnership with the town of Orangeville and the Humber Institute of Technology and Advanced Learning on Veterans Way. So kind of moving ahead with that story, we were able to launch the campus at the Alder Street Recreation Complex. The reason for that was, in fact, to leverage a cohort that would develop over a period of years. It's one thing to, as they say, build it and they will come, but many institutions at the time were looking at ways of supporting a cohort that would eventually develop. And so what we ended up doing is partnering with the town with the opportunity of utilizing underutilized space at the Alder Street complex on the second floor, and we built a college campus, working with a variety of different stakeholders, including the library, facilities with the town, and subsequently built a cohort that was just shy of about 600 students with 7 academic disciplines. So it also included the development of a home renovation and interior decorating lab as well that was just down the street off of, I guess, Town Line.
Oh, I
and
remember
Riddell.
that spot. That was a very cool spot.
It was really cool, and it was something that was kind of a little more advanced because you had 2 homes that were actually constructed by students within the facility. We're talking, micro homes, but at the same time it enabled students to garner the skill set. So kind of going back a little bit to my broadcasting career, the objective was to provide the leadership with guidance for people to become successful in their career path. And the same thing, in fact, was kind of part of, I think, my role with the Humber Orangeville campus. So as the decision to eventually build at the Veterans Way location became more cumbersome, changes at the provincial level, changes at the provincial ministry. It became more cumbersome to try and get the funding to expand. And then there were other pressures within the post-secondary system to support international students. And so I think the decision was made in 2019 to look at, unfortunately, the closing of the Orangeville campus. And I had also reached somewhat of a personal milestone with Humber to exit gracefully, and I retired from Humber in 2021. So amongst all of that, Lisa, was my involvement in volunteerism with the community, with my involvement with the local radio station at the time in 1988, was consulting. That's another part of my career that has also been something I'm very proud of. I actually launched a consultancy business in early 1990-91. So I did work not only across the GTA, across Canada, but also I was fortunate to do work around the world. So I was hired by the federal government to do work with Polski Radio, did some work with Magyar Radio in Hungary, did some work in the UK, helped a variety of broadcast entities and also non-traditional broadcast entities to develop their communication with, of course, their customers. Shoppers Drug Mart as one of the large entities, and many other entities that I would probably spend longer than the time that we have to talk about. But what that also did is provided me with other leadership skills that I've translated into, of course, what I'm doing now. So where that all fits is back to the piece about being involved in your community. So since surprisingly 1988, when I had the opportunity to not only do the Saturday morning radio show on the DC 103.5 radio station at the time, but I also had the opportunity as a consultant for the station to kind of figure out who the movers and shakers of our community were at the time. So this is where, we had the Kins and the Kinettes, we had the Rotarians, we had the Lions, the Lioness clubs, and they would all come knocking on the door, and and I started listening to what their messages were, and I was intrigued. So I had the opportunity of doing some work with the Kinsmen, and had a fortunate connection through a colleague of mine where her son suffered from cystic fibrosis. And before you know it, I'm involved with the Cystic Fibrosis Radiothon here locally.
Okay.
And so I actually hosted that for 4 years, raising funds not only for the local level, but also the national level. And then I saw the passion between the Kins and the Kinettes and what they were doing in the community. And I said, this is something that is really unique and something special about the community. And so my wife and I really started hunkering down a little bit about what our commitment was going to be to this community. So we literally were a part of this community from 1990 and until today, where I've invested time into the community through volunteerism and being intrigued by what makes this community so special.
So through all the time that you were even doing work with the radio stations that was taking you all over the world, was Orangeville always your home base through that?
It was. I actually was fortunate also to live in other parts of this country. My wife and I actually, when we got together, we were living in Streetsville at the time, but how we ended up in Orangeville, it's maybe serendipitous. It was because of looking at the in-laws and the outlaws, the Hatfields and the McCoys, as the story goes in our household, that the family was west of here, and my family was down in the GTA, and we just fell in love with the community, and we're still in love with the community. So we kind of move ahead through all of this, where I guess the advocacy, support, and waving the Orangeville flag got me thinking a number of times, where not only through the discussions I had with people in this community who said, maybe you should consider running for local politics, but we could see you running for local politics. I said, well, I'm impressed by that comment, but there are other people that are really good at doing that, and I don't know if the time was right for me to consider that. And so, lo and behold, I progressed through my career in the education side, the connection, the touch points I've had with so many great people. And I guess I was intrigued because I saw what was going on in our community, and I thought that maybe through the experiences that I've had, through the people that I've dealt with, the different organizations I've been involved with. One example is with the former Chamber of Commerce, which is now the Dufferin Board of Trade. Because of the connection with my role at Humber, there was somewhat of a request to have representation at the table. And that was early on in 2005, 2006. So I was kind of an early adopter of what was happening within the business community as well. And so I felt it was important for me to connect in that capacity, and subsequently ended up becoming a board member. And then, lo and behold, opportunity to become the chair of the Board of Trade. Prior to it becoming the Board of Trade, I actually went through that whole transition of a strategic plan to move a organization that had been in this community for close to 100 years in this region to now move it into the defined Board of Trade. So that was another opportunity to kind of wave the flag, not only for Orangeville, but also wave my flag of the things that I can do. So all of that came kind of into and fell into a blender, and I started thinking back about my opportunities of maybe seeking political life. And we all have strategies in our life, and my strategy has been to seek this out at the right time. And in 2014, I had assembled a team, and we were looking at the opportunities that existed. And I was aware of the existing council in 2014, and I thought, as much as I am willing and able to do so, the timing wasn't exactly right.
I didn't know you were planning on running in 2014.
In fact, I actually had picked up my candidate's package from the clerk's office at the town hall at the time, and I reviewed it with our team, and I said, let's hold off. And primarily because of my professional career in education, we were with Humber at the time was still actively looking at ways to effectively grow the campus, and of course the commitment that was on Veterans Way. So a lot can happen in a period of time. Changes within the senior administrative team at that organization, and then also, of course, my desire in 2018 to seek election. And so everything kind of, was strategized, but everything kind of fell into place. And to be fully transparent to the members of our community, I had to still get clearance from my organization I was involved in to allow me to run, because there was concerns about balancing the time.
Of course.
As you know firsthand. And
it's
especially,
a very busy job.
And people maybe take it for granted. This is a part-time role as a counselor, but it's a full-time commitment. And I still can't figure out how I was able to balance both worlds at the time from 2018 until the conclusion of our council term in 2022. But I was, during that period of time, I was absolutely enamored not only by yourself and the other members of council, but I was also enamored by the world of municipal governance. And I'm really a firm believer in following governance to better the community that you're serving or the organization you are in fact working for. And I was intrigued by not only how things worked, I took for granted, surprisingly, the people I had a chance to work with in my capacity at Humber, because there was a lot of cohesiveness because of the department connections. Community services, it could have been facilities, because we were in fact a leaseholder, a significant leaseholder at the Alder Street complex, and enabled me to kind of meet some tremendously talented people. And when I saw what they were up to, I said, this is something that I kind of think is neat, and I wouldn't mind being a part of. So this is where it kind of led me through the decision in 2017, 2018 to run. And our first 4-year period was one of learning. We had a worldwide pandemic that, of course, hit all of us, and
none of us were planned for that.
We didn't, and we had to pivot, as you know, to communicate with each other in such a professional way. And we had some things that we're moving through on a daily basis that the leadership team had to address, but we as a council, collectively, and I think really, really well, we did some miraculous things during a very difficult time. Moving ahead to your comment about why did I decide to run in 2022? Because I thought I had some unfinished business. Yep. I not only had the bug to give back, but I also want to see some of the things that we did not get a chance to complete because of the delays and the encumbrances of COVID. I want to see some of that come to fruition in this term. And so that's one of the reasons that I sought re-election. And again, I'm absolutely honored to be representing the members of our community. And I'm privileged to be doing so on a daily basis.
So when you decided to run the first time, whether it be in 2014 when you first started talking about it, or in 2018 when you pulled the trigger and did it, how did that go with your family? How did your family feel about it? Were they supportive? Were they nervous? Were they worried for you? I
have an incredibly understanding wife, and I have a son who at the time, you know, it didn't really matter. He thought it was kind of neat, but he really didn't understand what it meant. My wife is, and I absolutely adore her, she does not like the public limelight, where on the other hand, I don't mind it because I'm used to it.
We all seem to have spouses like that would rather stay home than come out with us, right?
And, you know, and I love her to death for that, but you know, she's also incredibly supportive. And I think the thing that I had to be transparent is that it's a time commitment. And she knows in my previous careers that I have had, you know, long days, long weeks, long months. You know, when you're doing work overseas, you're away for a period of time, you're still in communication, but you're in a situation where you don't have that luxury of being with your partner as much as you would like, but you have that trust and understanding. And I think in my particular case, as is the case in your household, when you have that support, you can do some good things. But you also have to end up taking the time to kind of remember who those people are. Absolutely. So my wife and son have been tremendously supportive, and I think that, you know, going through that first term, it was a learning experience for all of us. It is now, I think, an understanding of, you know, okay, I've got this committee responsibility. We have council meetings on Monday evenings. They will end up being either of a certain length or they'll be longer than we thought. But, you know, I always will go home on a Monday night and I know the dinner's been set aside for me, which is really, really special. So, were they ever concerned about some of the negative comments that you get on social media or any of that? Did that ever play a part? I know for my family it was quite hard. I will say that I separate it. I'm very good at doing so. My wife is really not into social media, and so she really doesn't see That's a good thing sometimes. And it is. On the other hand, my son is aware of some of the things that, and I mean, my son was born and raised in our community, went to school here, completed his school, and he's still connected to, you know, so many different people through, you know, minor hockey, minor sports, through high school. So people know who his dad is, but we also separate that too. Yeah. And I think that that's something that is very important to me. You know, I have a private life that I keep private, and then I have a public life. And I appreciate people understanding that there's a line that I don't cross, and there's also a line that I expect people not to cross either. And that's totally fair. Yeah. So you're right, we had a very interesting first term from 2018 to 2022 was filled with all sorts of big decisions, but also a lot of challenges. We had a lot of hurdles to cross. So what would you say was probably the most rewarding or the toughest things that you had to do in the first 4 years? Learn about municipal politics, the role of a councillor in respectively working with my council colleagues. You know, understanding the governance piece was not to say new. You know, having been on boards and understanding that whole process, but it is to respectively also understand that every decision has impact on the taxpayer, on the residents of our community. Yep. So I think the biggest one was not only the learning curve, which I feel very comfortable in my second term, that, you know, I think we're all pretty good for those of us that were fortunate to be reelected. But I think the other was the transition, making the decision between the OPS to the OPP. Yep. I knew a lot of these people personally and professionally. And I still recall having to go through the message that we were all able to provide on our decision at that time. And it was emotional for me. It was very tough. It was really tough because we had a full gallery. Yep. And I don't think outside of maybe a couple of most recent issues, we haven't had a gallery that has been that full. Nope. And I absolutely hope that we can have more people come to our gallery. But that was probably one of the most emotional pieces that I had to deal with, and one that I'm absolutely fully comfortable with the outcome. We have a great OPP detachment. Inspector Ward and his team are doing tremendous things, and it enabled individuals who may not have had the opportunity to elevate their own personal career objectives, they've been able to hopefully fulfill them.
Yeah.
There are other things that have transpired in our community. I think the other was, of course, having to deal with COVID, so quickly having to pivot. And one of my portfolios was, in fact, BDAC. It's been kind of massaged into a new acronym now, which is the Business Economic Development Advisory Committee. And having the opportunity with working with the then mayor to communicate government support for businesses who
that was a huge key piece.
Oh, it was so difficult to hear the stories from some of the businesses who have in fact persevered during COVID, who now find themselves in a better place, and there's some that have had difficulties, some who have also had some problems. Some businesses closed. We know that there were a number of businesses that across the province, across Canada, that were affected. But I'm also happy to say that through, I think, the combination of communication and having support from not only our local municipal government, but our provincial and federal governments, we see some good things in this post-COVID recovery time.
Absolutely.
So that was, I think, the two big ones. I mean, we could go on for hours about some of the others, but
there's some of the stuff that we get to do in a day as members of council are really, really rewarding, because we get to make some decisions that really impact people's days almost immediately.
We do.
So can you think of a time that we had a really rewarding moment where something was just, you knew it was a big impact right away?
Wow, there's so many that's on the table. I think, I take a look at something such as support for our food bank. And I know that this is most recent, but, as we're talking about it at this time,
it's timely.
Councillor Sherwood and I have just returned from what was known as the Association of Municipalities of Ontario Homelessness Symposium. And one of the things that I have learned is to understand and I think clearly educate myself on what the plights of our community are, while at the same time figuring out where we can best support the organizations that have already been able to support the people in need. So the food bank, for example, I know that the numbers continue to escalate because of the issues we have in our society.
Rising food costs,
absolutely,
inflation,
absolutely, and all the above. And I know the numbers continue to increase, and at the symposium they were talking that food banks are going to continue to see a escalation on people using it because of the imbalance that exists in our world. But just the aha moment when I know that you put forth as mayor the commitment for continuous funding for organizations, which included the food bank, that was an aha moment where I said, absolute, I know what the benefit is going to be. There are others that exist, but that to me is so impactful because the food bank has done some tremendous work in our community. We'll have to continue to do some tremendous food bank. And I know Heather Hayes was candid at one of our most recent council meetings where she said, I would rather be out of business, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
And I think that we have a responsibility as a community to step up as best we can.
You're absolutely right.
And I'm hoping that we can, as a community, do not only that for the food bank, but other organizations that also are finding it challenging times.
When we can find a good balance between fiscal responsibility and social responsibility, I think we've done a really good thing. So
I agree.
You're right, that contribution to the food bank and to some of the organizations who really need the support is going to be life-changing for a lot of them and for the work that they're able to do for our community.
Yes.
So we've got 4 years ahead of us now.
Yes.
And we've been faced with some high inflation, some other stuff. Budgeting was harder this year than it has been in the past. So what do you want to see happen over the next 4 years?
Capital works projects, as we know, and I know that some of my other council colleagues have expressed this and will continue to do so. We know that there are delays that are really out of our hands. Supply chain is affecting anything and everyone, not only at the municipal level, all levels of government, all levels of business, and even from a personal perspective. You want to have your roof done, we'll tell you what, you're going to have to end up getting into the queue. Or if you want to order a vehicle, you got to get into the queue. The same thing kind of is a part of our municipal world where we have specific projects that we know we're in the queue, but any delay, unfortunately, is going to subsequently delay the next part of that puzzle being put together, and it potentially is going to cost more. And I think that we have to be, as a council, incredibly cautious on what we're committing to in this term. We have the musts as well as the we hope to haves.
Yep.
And I think as a society we have to balance that out. We know that we have our Alder Street pool. We have, the Alder Street Recreation Complex has some challenges internally. Our library has to be completed because of not only AODA compliance issues with the new elevator. We have some other things such as the Hanson Street Bridge that is on the docket, and a couple of other things.
Big projects.
They are huge projects,
They're
and I
huge.
think that that's the piece that I also want to share as part of our discussion is that to anyone that's watching this show, and I hope we have a whole bunch of viewers, and you should, but I would love to see people be a little more educated as opposed to being hostile and critical without knowing the facts, and that is something that is really important. We're privileged to have the facts, and unfortunately we do get criticized for making the decisions that we have made. We have a very tough decision with the fire hall, for example, and this is a absolute must-have transition for a fire hall in its current location that is 50 years old. And it has outgrown its purpose. It is going to at some point be repurposed. That is yet to be defined. But we also have to respectively look at how we can also support that, not only with the funds that have been allocated to the project from the municipality, but how can we also support this with possible funds at maybe a different level of government, be that the provincial government. I know that, as you're aware, this past August of 2022, we had the opportunity of doing a pitch to 3 levels of government. We'll be doing that, I'm hoping, whatever the organization decides to do for the pitch to the ministers and whoever the ministers will be at the AMO conference. But that is just one touch point that gives us an opportunity to kind of take care of some of the things that we must take care of. So I'm hoping that members of our community educate themselves as opposed to being automatically critical of some of the decisions that we are making and or have made.
Absolutely. I think you nailed that. We're almost wrapped up. We've only got about, I know, we went through that really quickly. Joe, it's been an absolute pleasure to sit on council with you the last 4 years. I'm looking forward to these next 4 years. You've got about 30 seconds if you've got a final message that you'd like to send to the community. And I'm excited to see some of the work you're doing on your new committee. So
yes, well, I am absolutely excited. I'm thrilled to be involved with some of the people who have stepped forward. It's an absolute delight and honor to work with my fellow council, and it's also an absolute honor to work with you too as well. You have a vision, you have a pulse, you know exactly what's going on, and your leadership is spot on.
Thank you so much, Joe.
I thank our members of the community for their trust in us.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being here today to share with the community a little bit more about who Joe Andrews is. I think it's going to be a great lesson for the community. And thank you all for tuning into the post office. Looking forward to seeing you on the next show. And thank you again, Joe, for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
From Barbie to Oppenheimer and everything in between, film critic Dave Voigt and I preview the 2023 summer movie season on the next episode of Cinema Scene.
Looking for the best way to get the Major League Baseball games you want to watch? Rogers Super Sports Pack has you covered. With MLB Extra Innings, you'll have a premium ticket to out